Advances in the area of instructed SLA research in the last decades have given us a lot of insight into what effective L2 instruction should look like. It is generally accepted today that effective instruction needs to minimally include a lot of L2 input and the means to notice and to make form-meaning connections with the input. One pedagogical technique, a more implicit technique that has been the focus of much research recently is a technique called textual enhancement. For those of you who may not be familiar with this technique, in textual enhancement, we take a piece of written input, a text, and we embed in that text target structures that we want our learners to notice and to learn. And we manipulate the typographical features of those target structures. So we could do things like change the font style, we can enlarge the character size, we can underline it, we can bold it. Okay, and the goal here is to make it stand out, so that's perceptually salient. To make more salient these features of input that the learners normally may not notice on their own and make form-meaning connections for. This technique is based on the theoretical position that SLA cannot happen without exposure to comprehensible input, and the position that in order for input to be usable for acquisition, learners must minimally pay attention to the input and process it in some form. Some background on this line of research. Those of you familiar with this line of research know that the results to date have been pretty mixed. Okay, those of us working in textual enhancement, we have some studies that have found positive effects for textual enhancement, some studies that have not found any effects for textual enhancement, and some that have found partial effects. And it's been very difficult to synthesize this body of research because of the different target structures of different languages. Not to mention that in some studies compare textual enhancement enhanced conditions to unenhanced conditions, and other studies also include other variables such as explicit information and other interventions as well. So as a result, to date, it has not been easy for us to draw any concrete conclusions. A general limitation of this line of research has been that there's a lack of, not many of these studies have used any kind of online measure of noticing or attention during reading. Most of these they're pre-test, post-test designs, and we're making assumptions that the learners are paying attention to the target forms based on the post-test performance. Various researchers have criticized that without an online measure of attention, we cannot know for sure, we can really not know how learners are processing the enhanced input. Liao 2001 and Liao et al. 2003 in particular have raised the question of whether learners even notice the enhanced targets. They point out that there's this underlying assumption that by enhancing it with these typographical features that we are drawing our learners' attention to these enhanced forms. But it has been argued that without an online measure of attention, we really cannot know for sure. A handful of studies have addressed this issue by using think aloud protocols as an online measure of attention. The results there also have been inconclusive for a variety of methodological reasons. The study that I'm going to talk about today addresses this issue of online measures of attention in textual enhancement studies. But before going into the study using the eye tracking is the measure that I will be talking about today, I would first like to talk to you about an earlier study on textual enhancement that I did that was offline using paper and pencil tests, because this study actually provides a lot of the background information into what I will be talking about today with the eye tracking study. Okay. The study started in 2002. In this study, I enhanced L2 French learners' attention to written input in three ways. I used bolding of the target forms as the typographical manipulation. The targets were French prepositions a and en, used with geographical locations. Secondly, by orienting learners to pay attention to the target forms. And by that I mean they received explicit instruction to pay attention to the targets. And then I also manipulated the level of input in which these target forms were presented. There was a sentence level input condition and a discourse level condition. And the motivation behind that is that the idea that if we could decrease the processing load that learners, the processing load for processing input, then maybe learners would have more processing resources left over to help them pay attention to form. So that was the motivation for looking at a sentence level input with the assumption that that would be easier to process and comparing that with the discourse level input. Again, the target forms in that study, the prepositions a and en. As you all know, preposition a must be used with cities to say that one is in a specific city in French, and en used with countries that have a feminine grammatical gender. So I focus only on a and en, the feminine countries, not the masculine ones. Just looking at that one contrast. For the procedure, the participants were, they came from our 10266 classes at Ohio State, and this is a false beginners class. It was the class actually where we had the largest number of sections. In the United States, our enrollment is much lower in French, so we often try to find a class where we can get a lot of students. This is a pretest post-test design. They were pre-tested 2 weeks before treatment on the target forms using a fill-in-the-blank production task. It's a 20-item task. 10 items were for the target and the other 10 were distractors. And the distractor items were things like verb conjugations, where they would have the infinitive and they had to conjugate the verb correctly, and then the use of articles. Okay, the treatment took place, it was a classroom with intact classes. It was a classroom study. The participants read a text in one of 8 conditions. Now, the text was either enhanced or unenhanced, meaning in the enhanced condition that the targets were bolded. The text was either, the input was delivered either at a paragraph, the discourse level, or the sentence level. And they were either told explicitly to pay attention to the target forms, or they weren't given that direction line at all. So they read the text at their own pace. Following this treatment, they had an immediate post-test, and the post-test was the same format as the pre-test, just a different version of the pre-test. Okay? And delayed post-test was not possible in the study because we had to integrate this into the program, and these structures were actually taught in the curriculum, so we had to get in there before it was officially taught, and they came relatively early. They were actually formally taught this structure 1 week after the treatment. Okay. As for the results, okay, there was a main effect for textual enhancement. And post-hoc tests reviewed that this main effect was due to participants who received the enhanced text performing better than the pre-test, post-test performance than those who received the unenhanced text. So there was an effect for enhancement. There was also a main effect for input level. And post-hoc tests revealed that this main effect was due to those receiving the sentence level input text performing better than those who received the paragraph level. Okay, so those who got sentence level overall did better. There was a main effect for time, and there were no interactions. So to summarize this earlier study, this positive significant effect was found for textual enhancement, positive effect was found for sentence level input. Orientation, as it was operationalized in this study, did not have a significant impact in this study. Okay, so that was an earlier study. Now, limitation of the study, of course, there was no formal measure of noticing. While the superior performance of the subjects in enhanced conditions suggested that learners did notice the target forms, Liao and his colleagues, they made a good point that there was no formal online measure of noticing, and that's an important measure to include to see what learners are doing during real time. Okay. Just going back to what Liao said here, that Liao and his colleagues, they make raise this question of, we're doing all these studies with textual enhancement, and what we really need to answer first is, do they even notice? We're doing all these things, enhancing the input, we're doing all this typographical manipulation, but do they even notice it? We first need to answer that question. Now 2001 and Liao et al. 2003, they set out to investigate this question. They looked at Spanish as a second language, and they looked at verbs, Spanish verbs as a target form. So in one condition, they gave learners an enhanced version of the text to read, and in another group, an unenhanced version. And the verbs were, I can't remember the type of enhancement they used, but they stood out. And they used Think Aloud protocols as their online measure of attention to see if there would be any differences in the amount of noticing of the target forms between the enhanced group and the unenhanced group. And they did not find a significant difference. And this led them to conclude that, well, you know, maybe this enhancement thing is not really doing much at all. Based on these protocols, these Think Aloud protocols, we're not seeing that the enhanced group is reporting at least more noticing of these forms. Now, I have raised the concern in previous publications that there might be a limitation in the methodology here, in that what Liao and his colleagues did was that in both conditions, they were told explicitly to pay attention. There's a direction line that said, pay attention to all new verb forms. They weren't specifically told to pay attention to the target verbs, but they were told to pay attention to all new verb forms. So the enhanced condition was told that, as well as the unenhanced condition. So we may wonder then if that direction line might have had an influence in the no results that these studies found, because both groups were told to pay attention to new verb forms. Okay. So in this study, I'm proposing to use a different kind of online measure, eye tracking, using eye tracking as an online measure of attention to investigate this question further. The study is still in progress. It is a study that I am doing with my colleague Mark Overstreet at Dickinson College in Pennsylvania. Eye tracking presents us with a lot of rich data and with, I think, greater degrees of accuracy of what is actually happening. Eye tracking allows a researcher to determine with a fairly accurate amount of accuracy what the learners are fixating on in the input as they read, how often they fixate on targets, as well as how long they are fixating on the targets. Okay. In this study, the materials are the same as the earlier study that I did. So the exact same text, the exact same input. It's just that what the difference is the mode of delivery is different. In the earlier study was a paper and pencil, and in this study it was done with the eye tracker. Okay, these were the research questions. The general research question was, do textual enhancement and/or input level have an effect on learners' reading of locative prepositions a versus en in French? That was the overall question. We had sub-questions. 1, are there effects on the probability that a target item will be fixated by learners of French as measured by the iLink2 eye tracking system? That's the eye tracking system that I'm currently using. iLink2 was developed by SR Research. I believe it's based in Toronto. They actually have a more sophisticated model now that is called the iLink3, I believe. Are there effects on the number of fixations made by learners of French as measured by the iLink2 eye tracking system? So looking at the number of fixations. And are there effects on learners' first fixation duration? Okay. Meaning the first time, how long they fixated on the first fixation. So those were our research questions there. The participants, in this present analysis, we have 56 participants, same level enrollment as the earlier study, 10266, which is a FOSS beginners class. At the time of the experiment, they had not received any formal instruction on the target structure. They did eventually 1 week later after the treatment period. Just a note that additional data have been collected, and we will be analyzing that this summer. It's a very long process to collect this kind of data, especially at Ohio State University. I don't know about here in Canada. Our Human Subjects Research Board, it's hard to get the permission and having it take place in the lab. It's very long process. So it's taken us almost 2 years to complete the data collection process. And they were paid $20 each to come in, and that didn't do the trick. Actually, $20 is not much, I guess, these days for our students. So this study was done in a laboratory, in a second acquisition language lab, so it's outside of the classroom. That's why it took so much time. You have to do one subject at a time with one machine. They were pre-tested before the treatment, so they come in, they were given the pretest, the same pretest that I had used in the earlier study. So they were, yes, did the pretest, and after they finished the pretest, we sat them down in front of the monitor. This is a picture of the eye tracker and the monitor that the subject would look at. We first had to calibrate the subject's pupils to the eye tracker. This is a head-mounted eye tracker. Now, like SR Research now has a chin rest. Now that makes actually the calibration process much simpler. So after we calibrate the pupils to the eye tracker, the subject read each slide. So the input was delivered through the computer screen, and they had a button to push. So they read at their own pace. Each subject read at its own pace by pushing a button, moving from one slide to the next. After the treatment, then they were given the post-test, the post-test that I had used for the previous study. Now the groups here, the input that they received was either enhanced, sentence level, unenhanced, sentence level, enhanced at the discourse level, unenhanced, discourse level. Okay, I did not look at orientation this time in the study because in the earlier study I found that orientation did not make a difference. So it's really hard for you to see here, but this is an example of one of the slides of the paragraph level group with the enhanced input. And you can see here the here is bolded, it's bolded, and that is the sentence level input with the same target structure. So the sentence level text actually just took directly from the paragraph level text. Okay, so this is an example of what the subject saw. So they read one slide, they're done, press the button, move to the next slide. In terms of analyzing the results, all the participants read the same paragraph prior to the treatment phase. Before the actual treatment slides, we had a slide that was the same for everybody to allow us to assess reading time. And we only used the participants whose reading time on that paragraph was within 1.5 standard deviations of the mean, just to make sure that that the subjects we were looking at were reading at more or less the same pace. Okay. For the results, to the first question, okay, is there an increase in the probability of fixation, okay, with textual enhancement? We found that for the sentence level group, the unenhanced, they fixated about 62% of the time. And the enhanced version, sentence level, 65% of the time. For the paragraph level input, unenhanced, 47.9% of the time, and the enhanced, those who got the enhanced version, fixated on the targets about 58% of the time. So as you can see here, there is something happening with the enhancement and also with the sentence level input, which actually is going to support what I found with the offline study. For the second question, is there an increase in the number of fixations? Here, we found a main effect for input level. And post hoc tests here revealed that this main effect for input level was due to the sentence level, in favor of the sentence level input, that there was an increase in the number of fixations with the sentence level input. A main effect for enhancement, okay, and that is with the textual enhancement groups doing that. Greater fixation, increased number of fixations with those reading the enhanced version of the text. And we also found a main effect for target, which is something we didn't really expect to find. Here's the graph. You can see, so you see here, number of fixations, sentence level, the paragraphs. You can see how the sentence level is up. Here, with preposition en, sentence level, paragraph, okay? And it's interesting that they seem to be fixating more frequently on the preposition a than the preposition en. So that was an interesting finding for us that we didn't expect to find. We're still looking for an answer for that, and one of the reasons may be that we don't have the accent here, but that the a has an accent mark on it, and that may be, these are beginning learners of French, which may make it more novel for them, so they may fixate it on it more frequently. For the third question, is there an effect on the first fixation duration? So and the length of the fixation? And there we found no significant effects for the first fixation. Okay. The analysis of the paper and pencil process is still in progress. We will be looking at that as well, looking at how much did they actually learn something. We have the results here that they do fixate, and we have results showing that in the enhanced conditions, they fixate more frequently. But we're also interested in seeing if these fixations lead to any kind of learning, okay, and that is still in progress. So to summarize these preliminary results, we can say at this point that textual enhancement has a positive effect on the probability that a target form will be fixated. Textual enhancement has a positive effect on the number of target fixations. So these results are different from what Liao and his colleagues found in their earlier studies. We can say at this point, sentence level input results in greater number of target fixations than the discourse level input. And the subject fixated on the preposition a more frequently than on the preposition en. That again, we're maybe during the discussion we can talk about that a little bit. Why there's that difference that we weren't expecting. So based on these results, using eye tracking as an online measure of attention, I think we can conclude here that learners do notice the enhancement in enhanced input. So it is doing something here. Because we're seeing that there is a greater probability that they will fixate on the targets when the input is enhanced. And I'm encouraged to find here that the targets were noticed more frequently in the sentence level input, which supports the findings of my earlier study. So it may be that when we reduce the processing load of learners by giving them input that's easier to process, then that will free up their attentional resources to allow them to focus on the target forms. At the moment, the paper and pencil process are not complete of measuring learning, but I believe, I'm pretty confident that once we do analyze those results, they will probably mirror the results of the earlier study in finding an effect for learning as well, because we use the same subject pool and using the same materials, the same testing and treatment materials. For the next, there's another analysis we would like to do too for further analysis that we haven't looked at yet. We also want to see now we know that the enhancement is doing something. A question we're asking now too is, will participants who received textual enhancement, will they now go on to fixate on the target structures in the absence of enhancement? What we built in the study was after the treatment slides, the different versions of the treatment slides, we included some slides that all participants received that were not enhanced. So by looking at those, analyzing the results from those slides, we want to see in those slides with no enhancement, those who previously received textual enhancement, are they now going to focus on these targets on their own without now these targets being enhanced? Okay, so that's sort of the next phase of our study. So. That's